The full coal cart rolled past the waiting families while frost smoked from their mouths, and nothing smoked from their chimneys. West Riding of Yorkshire, the 18th January 1847. Before 8 o'clock, the yard outside Brackenhurst Colliery had filled with women carrying baskets, old men leaning on sticks, and children wrapped in shawls too thin for the cold. The cart was heaped high with black coal, its iron-rimmed wheels grinding over frozen ruts toward the Rillford road. No one called after it. Hunger made people plead. Cold made them quiet. Ruth Bromley stood beside the distribution table with the parish ledger beneath one hand and a brass token resting in the other. She was 34, plainly dressed in brown wool, with ink on the side of her middle finger and a grey scarf pinned beneath her chin. Nothing about her invited attention. Everything about the way she studied the page discouraged interruption. "Number 47, she said. "Mrs. Webb, Willow Row Cottage." Martha Webb nodded. Her face was raw from wind, and both hands were wrapped around an empty coal scuttle. "That's right. I haven't had a fire since Monday." The yard clerk, a narrow young man named Pell, ran one finger down the redemption column. "It says here you collected 200 weight on Tuesday." "I didn't. The book says you did." "Then the book is wrong." Pell looked up, more offended by the suggestion than moved by the woman before him. "Books don't invent signatures." Ruth extended her hand. In her palm lay a round brass token stamped with the Dunleigh crest and the number 47. Its center remained whole. "This token has not been punched." Pell's mouth tightened. Then she kept it back. "That is not how the system works. A household token is surrendered at collection. The yard clerk punches it, drops it into the locked redemption box, and enters the household number beside the measured allotment. Mrs. Webb cannot have redeemed this token and still possess it unpunched." A few people in the queue shifted closer. Mrs. Webb glanced behind her, ashamed of becoming a spectacle when all she had asked for was coal. Josiah Pike emerged from the office in a dark greatcoat, his silver watch chain visible against his waistcoat. He had managed Brackenhurst lands for 11 years and wore respectability as another man might wear armor. "What is delaying the line?" Pell closed the ledger halfway. "Mrs. Webb disputes an entry, sir." Pike's gaze moved to Ruth. "Of course she does. Miss Bromley has never met a settled account she could not unsettle." Ruth held out the token. "The entry cannot be settled while the physical token contradicts it." Pike did not take it. "You are here to copy parish allotments, not instruct my staff in estate commerce." "I am here to ensure parish households receive what has been allotted to them. And I am here to ensure this yard functions. Close distribution." A murmur passed through the line. Mrs. Webb's grip tightened on the empty scuttle. "Please, Mr. Pike, my girl is ill." Pike turned as if he had not heard her. Ruth stepped around the table. "There are 12 families still waiting. Then 12 families may return tomorrow. Some have already returned twice. Take care, Miss Bromley. Your appointment exists because the rector has an inconvenient tenderness for unfortunate cases. It can be withdrawn." Ruth felt every eye in the yard settle on her. Fear would have been easier if only her own position had been at stake. "Then withdraw it after the coal is measured," she said. Pike's expression hardened. Pell shut the ledger. Approaching hooves cut through the yard before Pell could obey. A travelling carriage appeared beyond the gate, dark lacquer dulled by road salt, its horses steaming in the cold. The driver reined in when he saw the queue and loaded cart. A groom descended first, then Maxwell Kingscote, Duke of Dunleigh, stepped down into the frozen mud. He had been expected at Brackenhurst Hall the following week. Men removed their caps. Women lowered their eyes. Pike changed at once. Concern appeared on his face as neatly as if a servant had placed it there. "Your Grace, we had no notice you meant to travel today." Maxwell looked past him toward the families. He was 39, tall, dark-haired, and still wearing the severe black coat in which he had left London. His gaze paused on the children nearest the wall, then on the full cart angled toward the road. "Clearly," he said. His quiet voice made the yard quieter. "Why is that cart leaving while these people are waiting?" Pike moved between him and the ledger. "A commercial consignment, Your Grace. The household distribution has encountered a minor irregularity." Ruth saw the moment Maxwell registered the phrase, then the empty scuttles, blue hands, and Mrs. Webb's shame. What irregularity? Pike glanced toward Ruth, as though presenting an irritation. "Miss Bromley believes she understands the estate's coal accounts better than the men appointed to keep them." Maxwell's eyes found her. They were grey, steady, and more observant than she had expected from a man who spent most of the past year in London. He looked at the token in her hand. "Do you?" Ruth understood the trap. Agreement would sound arrogant. Refusal would abandon the truth. "I understand the redemption procedure, Your Grace." "Explain it." Pike gave a small laugh. "Surely this can wait until you have reached the hall." Maxwell did not look away from Ruth. "Can it?" "No, Your Grace. Mrs. Webb's household is recorded as having received 200 weight of coal. She still possesses the only token issued to that household. It is unpunched. Either the entry is false, or another token bearing the same number has been accepted in its place." Maxwell's expression changed. Not disbelief. Attention. His gaze dropped briefly to her ink-marked fingers, then returned to her face. She had not asked him to trust her. She had asked him to look. "And the cart?" he asked. It was leaving before the discrepancy was examined. Ruth turned toward the gate. The driver had gathered the reins again. "Where is it going?" she called. The driver looked to Pike. Ruth moved beside the gate, clear of the horses, and placed one gloved hand on the wooden post. "I asked where you are taking it." "Rillford Road, miss. That is not a destination." "Enough," Pike snapped. Maxwell raised one hand. Pike fell silent. The Duke walked toward the cart and looked up at the piled coal. "You will remain where you are until the records are examined." The driver lowered the reins. Maxwell turned to the yard clerk. "Open the store. Every household with a valid allotment receives emergency coal before sunset." Pike's composure fractured. "Your Grace, without verifying the accounts, that may create a second loss. Then I shall bear it." Maxwell looked over the waiting line. They will not. Pell reopened the ledger. Workers crossed toward the storehouse. Mrs. Webb pressed one hand to her mouth, and Ruth looked down because dignity sometimes required privacy, even in gratitude. When she lifted her eyes again, Maxwell was watching her. Not with gallantry, not with pity, with the grave recognition one responsible person gives another when both have seen the same wrong. Then Pike pulled the ledger toward him and opened it fully. "Before your Grace places confidence where it may not belong," he said, tapping the redemption line, "you should see who certified number 47. Maxwell stepped closer. Ruth did not move. Beside the entry, in a hand designed to resemble hers, were the initials R.B. Ruth stared at the initials until the yard seemed to narrow to the width of the ledger page. Letters resembled hers. The first stroke of the R leaned forward, and the tail of the B curved inward as she had been taught to form it. Yet the hand was not hers. Whoever had copied her writing had remembered its appearance and missed the habit beneath it. Ruth always lifted her pen before closing the lower loop. This writer had not. A faint bridge of ink joined the curve. "I didn't write that," she said. Pike folded his hands over the ledger. "It is a convincing imitation, then." Maxwell's gaze moved from the initials to Ruth's face. "How can you tell?" "Because I know where my hand hesitates." She pointed without touching the page. "The lower loop is continuous. Mine never is. The ink is wrong as well. I use the parish bottle, which dries brown at the edge. This is black throughout." Pike did not blink. A woman accused by her own initials will naturally discover differences no one else can see. Ruth met his eyes. "Then compare them with a known parish entry." Maxwell turned to his groom. "Send to Brackenhurst Hall. Ask Mr. Vale to come at once with sealing paper, labels, and his writing case." Pike's mouth tightened. "Your Grace, the estate solicitor need not be troubled over a clerical dispute." 6 cold households are not a clerical dispute." "6?" Ruth asked. Maxwell looked at her. "You said Mrs. Webb's case may not stand alone." Ruth drew the ledger closer. "May I examine the surrounding entries?" Pike reached for it first. "This book belongs to the estate office." Maxwell placed one gloved hand upon the cover. "And the estate belongs to my charge. Miss Bromley may examine it." Pike released the book. Ruth turned back 3 pages, then forward 2. She knew the household numbers because she had copied the parish allotment lists herself. Number 12 belonged to old Mr. Hales near Mill Lane. Number 31 belonged to the Dorridge sisters. Number 54 belonged to the family at the end of Willow Row. Each entry showed a collection within the past 4 days. Each bore initials resembling those of a parish witness. "These 5, she said. "They asked for fuel yesterday or the day before. I helped complete their requests because nothing had arrived." Pell swallowed. "They may have forgotten an earlier collection." 5 households forgot 200 weight of coal in the same week? Maxwell leaned over the ledger. His nearness altered the air beside her. What should have happened to the tokens after collection? They should have been surrendered here, punched through the center, and dropped into the locked redemption box. At the end of each fortnight, the tokens should be counted against the ledger and colliery weight sheets. "Where is the box?" Pell pointed toward the office wall. A square iron box stood beneath a shelf. Pike removed a key from his waistcoat. "There is no reason to open it before the fortnight ends." "There is now," Maxwell said. Pike unlocked it. Pell tipped the contents onto the counting table. Brass discs struck the wood. Ruth sorted them by number, 12. 31, 54. None appeared. Neither did the other disputed numbers. She lifted Mrs. Webb's token again. If this household had received coal, this should be among them with a punched center. Maxwell reached for it at the same moment she did. Their fingertips brushed over the cold brass. The contact was slight, yet both stopped. Ruth felt the warmth of his hand against fingers chilled by the yard. Maxwell's eyes lifted to her face. Then he withdrew at once. "Forgive me," he said. "There's nothing to forgive." Her voice remained steady, though awareness lingered where he had touched her. She placed the token flat upon the table. Maxwell did not reach for it again. "The 5 households will be inspected this afternoon. Their coal bins, delivery records, and tokens will be examined before parish witnesses." Pike's expression hardened. "You are allowing a woman with a personal grievance to direct an estate inquiry." Ruth's spine stiffened. "My grievance is with false entries." "Your grievance began 7 years ago when your father left this office in disgrace." The yard went still. Daniel Bromley's name had long been used in Brackenhurst as a warning about trusted men who stole from those above them. Ruth had spent years watching pity turn into suspicion whenever she entered an estate room. Maxwell looked at Pike. What connection does her father have to today's entries? He was dismissed after coal accounts failed to balance. Miss Bromley has never accepted the finding. Perhaps she imagines a scandal now will cleanse an old one. My father is dead, Ruth said. He cannot benefit from what happens here. But you can. Pike glanced between her and Maxwell. A public quarrel with the estate might restore your standing. It might also place you under distinguished protection. The insult was polished enough to sound reasonable. Maxwell's face became still. You will not speak of Miss Bromley in that manner again. Pike bowed his head. I meant only to warn your grace of an appearance. Then concern yourself with the appearance of a full cart leaving while entitled households stand empty-handed. Hoofbeats sounded at the gate. A brougham entered the yard, and Mr. Elias Vale, the estate solicitor, descended with a leather case. Maxwell explained the discrepancy. Vale asked Mrs. Webb to state her name, cottage, and possession of the token before 3 witnesses. She did so. Ruth placed token number 47 upon clean paper. Vale recorded its unpunched center, worn edge, crest, number, and present custody. Mrs. Webb, do you authorize Miss Bromley to retain this token temporarily for examination? I do. And you affirm it was issued to your household and has not been surrendered? I do. Vale wrote the statement, and Mrs. Webb made a careful mark beside her name while the rector's clerk witnessed it. Maxwell spoke. Miss Bromley, I am appointing you temporary independent examiner of the household fuel accounts. You will have access to the redemption ledger, distribution lists, weight sheets, and delivery records. Mr. Vale will record every document removed or copied. Ruth looked at him. Your Grace, Pike will say the appointment proves I have influenced you. Pike may say whatever truth permits him to say, and if the truth implicates my father, then it will be recorded. If it clears him, that will be recorded too. You will not be asked to choose between honesty and his memory. Ruth inclined her head. Then I accept. Vale opened the ledger beneath the window. Ruth began marking disputed entries on a separate sheet. On the 3rd page, she noticed a tiny black crescent beside Mrs. Webb's false redemption. The same crescent appeared beside number 12, then number 31. It sat low near the ruling, almost hidden by the line. There, she said. Maxwell bent closer, careful not to touch her this time. What is it? A mark made with the side of a nib. It appears beside every disputed entry. They counted in silence. Not 5, not 6. 18 house numbers carried the same small crescent. By mid-afternoon, Maxwell, Ruth, Vale, and 2 parish witnesses had crossed the frozen lanes to the first 6 cottages. At every door, the answer was the same. No coal had been delivered. Every bin was empty. At the 6th cottage, Ruth stood beside a brick recess, scraped bare enough to show old dust. Vale closed his notebook. Maxwell looked toward the roofs fading into winter dusk. 18 entries, he said. 18 cold houses. Ruth thought of the full cart on the Rillford road. And somewhere, she answered, 18 allotments of coal. Before dawn on the 2nd morning, Maxwell ordered every cart in the Brackenhurst coal yard to remain where it stood until its load, slate, and destination had been examined. By 7 o'clock, lanterns burned along the frozen wall, their yellow light catching on iron rims, harness buckles, and the breath of restless horses. Ruth arrived from the Rectory Road, with token number 47, secured inside a small leather purse beneath her cloak. Mr. Vale met her at the gate, carrying the written statement signed by Mrs. Webb and witnessed the previous day. Pike was already there. He stood near the office steps with his coat buttoned to the throat, his expression composed enough to suggest that 18 empty coal bins had been a tiresome inconvenience rather than evidence of theft. "Your Grace is delaying contracted deliveries," he said, as Maxwell approached the first cart. "If the roads soften by noon, the estate may be liable for losses. Then we shall discover whether the estate contracted to deliver its own household's coal elsewhere," Maxwell replied. "No cart leaves until Miss Bromley and Mr. Vale have seen its papers." Pike looked at Ruth. "You have given her extraordinary authority on the strength of an unpunched disc and several cold rooms, on the strength of physical evidence contradicting your accounts." Maxwell turned away from him. "Begin." The first 2 carts carried coal for the hall kitchens and the village smithy. Their slates matched the loading sheet, and the weights entered beside them showed no disputed household numbers. Ruth checked each mark while Vale recorded the inspection. The 3rd cart was covered with tarred canvas and declared as culm for a brick kiln beyond Rillford. Ruth lifted one corner of the canvas. The coal beneath was clean, broad-fractured household fuel, not the small dust and inferior fragments described on the sheet. "This is wrongly classified," she said. The yard foreman avoided her eyes. Pike answered for him. "Coal varies within a seam. You cannot determine a commercial grade by looking at one exposed corner. I can determine that these pieces were sorted for domestic burning. Your father taught you to copy weights, Miss Bromley. He did not make you a viewer." The word struck where Pike intended. A viewer at a colliery judged coal, labour, and output. Ruth possessed no official title. She had only years spent beside Daniel while he reconciled cart tallies and explained why a careless mark could deprive one cottage or conceal one dishonest load. "No," she said. "He taught me to notice when a description protects a transaction rather than describes it." Maxwell glanced at the coal, then at the sheet. "Hold this cart for a later grade inspection." Pike's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. 4 more carts passed examination. The 5th stood near the outer gate, already turned toward the road. A rectangular slate hung from an iron hook at the driver's bench. In white chalk were the letters PLW, followed by Rillford. Ruth felt the cold more sharply. "Portman Lime Works," she said. The driver shifted in his seat. "That's the destination, miss." Pike stepped forward. "A lawful commercial purchaser. The Portman Works have taken Dunleigh coal for years." "At household grade?" Ruth asked. "At whatever grade the contract permits." Maxwell looked up at the driver. "Remove the slate." The man obeyed. As he lifted it from the hook, something struck the frozen stones with a clear metallic note. Every head turned. A brass disc spun once beside the wheel, flashed in the lantern light, and fell flat. Maxwell reached it first. He removed one glove and picked it up between thumb and forefinger. The Dunleigh crest marked one side. On the other, beneath a shallow scratch where wire had rubbed the edge, was the number 47. Ruth heard Mrs. Webb's voice from the day before. "I have not had a fire since Monday." She took the leather purse from beneath her cloak and opened it. Token A lay inside, intact and unpunched. "Mr. Vale," she said, and her own voice sounded distant. "Please witness that this is the token Mrs. Webb entrusted to me yesterday." Vale stepped nearer. "I confirm it." Ruth held token A upon her open palm. Maxwell extended his bare hand beside hers, token B resting in its center. The 2 discs bore the same crest, the same number, and the same tiny defect at the upper curve of the 7. For one suspended moment, the yard seemed to disappear around them. Ruth saw only two pieces of brass and the impossible cruelty between them. One had remained with a woman whose children slept in a cold cottage. The other had travelled with a full cart, bound for a profitable works. Maxwell's eyes met hers. There was no courtly softness in his expression. There was anger, but beneath it lay something graver. Recognition. He understood precisely what she understood. The system had not merely failed, it had been made to lie. "They're identical," Vale said. Pike recovered first. "Similar, perhaps. These tokens are produced in batches." Ruth looked at the matching flaw. Not similar, struck from the same die and given the same household number. That proves nothing about the cart. Then why was it wired behind the destination slate? Maxwell asked. He turned to the driver. "Who placed it there?" The man's face had gone pale. "It was attached when the slate came from Mr. Pike's office, Your Grace." Pike's voice sharpened. "Mind yourself. Maxwell did not raise his own. You will not threaten a witness in my presence." The driver swallowed. "The numbered pieces go with Portman loads, Your Grace. Their receiving clerk uses them to match each cart to the payment entry. We hand over the slate and the token together." Ruth looked at token B again. "Then the household number serves twice, once in the estate ledger to claim the family received coal, and once at Portman Works to identify the diverted shipment." "That is conjecture," Pike said. "It is a mechanism," she replied. "The payments will determine whether it is conjecture." Maxwell closed his fingers around token B without touching her hand. "Mr. Vale, record where this was found, who found it, the driver's statement, the wire abrasion, and every person present." Vale opened his case on the cart step. He sketched both faces of the token, then prepared 2 sheets of clean paper and separate labels. Ruth placed token A upon the first, only after he recorded Mrs. Webb's ownership and her own temporary custody. Maxwell placed token B upon the second. Vale wrapped each disc, tied each packet, and pressed his seal across the knots. He marked them A and B. "Both will remain in my evidence chest at Brackenhurst Hall," he said. "Separate packets, separate entries." Ruth watched token A disappear beneath the paper. Mrs. Webb had entrusted it to her. Its transfer now had witnesses, a written record, and a seal. It had not vanished into an office, where someone might later claim it had never existed. Maxwell turned toward the yard gates. "Close them. No commercial dispatch leaves Brackenhurst until further notice." Pike stepped closer. "Your Grace, you cannot suspend every contract because one driver carried an unauthorized token. I can suspend the use of my roads, my yard, and my coal while I determine who has used all 3 to freeze my tenants." He pointed to the Portman cart. "Unloaned this at the village distribution store. Mrs. Webb and every household identified yesterday will receive their full allotment under parish witness." A murmur moved through the workers. It was not applause. These were men too dependent on wages for that. Yet shoulders lifted. Eyes that had avoided Ruth now turned toward her openly. Pike saw it. "You are allowing Miss Bromley to direct estate policy." "No," Maxwell said. "I am allowing evidence to direct estate policy. Miss Bromley is the person who recognized it." He faced Pike fully. "You are removed from direct control of the coal yard until this inquiry is complete. You will surrender the yard keys to Mr. Vale." For the first time, Pike's composure broke, only slightly. His hand remained at his side for one beat too long before he produced the ring of keys. Vale accepted them and recorded the transfer. The cart began to turn, no longer toward Rillford, but toward the village cottages. Ruth watched its wheels cut a fresh line through the frost. Beside her, Maxwell stood in silence. Their hands no longer held the two tokens, yet the image of them remained between them. "How many winters?" he asked quietly. Ruth looked at the disputed entries waiting inside the office. "We don't know yet. We will." She believed he meant it, not because he was a duke, but because he had looked at the two identical numbers and had not tried to explain away what they demanded of him. A messenger arrived near noon on a lathered bay horse. He carried a cream envelope sealed with dark green wax and addressed to Maxwell in an elegant hand. Vale read the crest before passing it over. "Portman." Maxwell broke the seal. The note inside was brief. "Lady Eugenia Portman protested the seizure of contracted coal, denied any irregularity at the works, and requested an immediate private meeting before the Duke's actions damaged both families." Pike watched from the office doorway. Ruth saw calculation return to his face. She turned away from him and gathered the copied ledger pages. On the lowest disputed line, beside the small black crescent, another mark caught her attention. It was no larger than the head of a pin, a hooked stroke beneath the number, almost concealed by the ruling. Ruth had seen it before, years ago, in the pocket tally book her father kept until the week he was dismissed. Ruth had not opened her father's tally book in nearly 5 years. It lay at the bottom of a narrow walnut box beneath folded handkerchiefs, and 2 letters she no longer read. Its brown leather cover, softened by use and darkened at the corners by Daniel Bromley's fingers. On the morning of the 3rd day, she carried it to Brackenhurst Hall, wrapped in plain linen, as carefully as if she were transporting something breakable. In truth, it was the memory attached to it that might not survive handling. Mr. Vale received her in the small estate study rather than the grand library. Maxwell was already there, standing beside the fire with the copied ledger pages arranged across a long table. He had removed his travelling coat, but he still looked as though London had not quite released him. His black waistcoat was severe, his cravat precise, and the fatigue beneath his eyes suggested he had spent much of the night reading accounts. Pike was absent. Ruth noticed that first. "Mr. Pike has been instructed to remain away from the coal office until Mr. Vale completes the first inventory," Maxwell said, reading the question she had not voiced. "He has protested in writing." "I expected he would." Ruth placed the wrapped book on the table. "This belonged to my father." Vale drew a clean sheet toward him. "Do you consent to our examining it, Miss Bromley?" "Yes. The original remains mine, of course." He recorded the time, location, owner, and condition before Ruth untied the linen. The leather clasp had warped, and the brass tongue resisted her thumb. When it opened, the familiar scent of old paper rose between them. Daniel's handwriting filled the pages in compact rows, household numbers, cart weights, dates, marks that had meant nothing to Ruth when she was younger because her father had believed there would be time to explain them. There had not been. Maxwell did not touch the book. "You said yesterday that the hooked mark beside the disputed entries appeared here." Ruth turned to a page near the middle. "Here, and again here." The same mark curved beneath several numbers. Beside each stood a weight written in hundredweights and quarters. Some entries carried the letters R.W. My father used private abbreviations when he feared a page might be seen before he could finish an inquiry. "Did he tell you what these meant?" "No. He was dismissed before I asked." Maxwell's expression tightened. Vale opened a separate estate file. Daniel Bromley served as assistant coal account clerk for 14 years. 7 years ago, The annual figures showed a shortage of nearly 20 tons. Mr. Pike reported irregular entries under Mr. Bromley's hand. Ruth kept her gaze on the tally book. My father denied stealing anything. Was there an inquiry? Maxwell asked. Vale hesitated. An internal review. Conducted by whom? Mr. Pike and the former steward. And the decision? Vale slid a folded sheet across the table. Dismissal without pension. The order bears the late Duke's approval. Maxwell looked down at his father's signature. For several moments, only the fire spoke. Ruth had seen that signature once before, at the bottom of the notice delivered to their cottage. Daniel had read it, standing by the window. He had folded it with such care that she had mistaken his restraint for calm. My father approved the dismissal without hearing Bromley himself, Maxwell asked. The memorandum states that a personal hearing might embarrass the family and encourage public gossip, Vale replied. Maxwell's mouth hardened, so silence was considered evidence. Ruth looked at him then. Silence was considered convenient. He accepted the correction without defense. Did your father continue investigating after his dismissal? I believe so. He walked to Rillford twice that winter. He returned with mud to his knees, and would say only that numbers behaved better than men, because they did not alter themselves to please a superior. She touched the page. He died in 1842 without clearing his name. I am sorry, Maxwell said. The words were simple. He did not soften them with claims that Daniel must have been innocent. Ruth respected him for that, though respect did not make the old pain less sharp. I want the truth, she said, not a kinder version of it. If my father made an error, I will not call it virtue because he was loved. Maxwell met her eyes. And if my house condemned him wrongly, I will not call it necessity because the signature belonged to my father. Vale lowered his gaze to the papers, granting them the small privacy of not being watched. Ruth turned another page. The entries shifted. Earlier figures listed only token numbers. Later ones paired those numbers with cart weights. This is what matters, she said. The duplicate token explains how a household allotment could be marked as collected, but my father was tracking the weight of entire carts. He believed the missing coal exceeded the value of the relief tokens alone. Maxwell moved closer to the table. Then the household theft may have concealed a larger diversion. Yes. Ruth ran her finger beneath one line. The warped clasp sprang back and caught the side of her finger. She drew in a breath. A bright bead of blood appeared beside the nail. Maxwell moved instinctively, then stopped before reaching her. May I? His question changed the moment. He was a duke. He could order gates closed, men suspended, contracts halted. Yet he waited over something as small as her injured hand. Ruth looked from his face to the hand he had extended, palm upward rather than grasping. Yes, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed lightly beneath hers. The touch was deliberate, warm, and careful. He drew a clean handkerchief from his pocket, folded it, and pressed it around the cut without tightening more than necessary. Ruth watched his concentration. It unsettled her more than gallantry would have done. Gallantry asked to be admired. This asked only not to hurt her. It is shallow, he said. The clasp is sharper than it appears. That has been true of many things in this room. A faint change touched his expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough to answer hers. Tell me if I am pressing too firmly. You're not. He tied the linen once, then released her hand as soon as the bandage held. The absence of his touch was immediate. Ruth curled her fingers carefully and returned them to the edge of the tally book. Maxwell stepped back, restoring the proper distance, Without pretending the moment had not occurred, Vale cleared his throat and indicated the page. The abbreviation RW appears beside 9 entries. All correspond to dates when cart weights were adjusted after leaving Brackenhurst. Rillford, Ruth said. It may mean Rillford. Rillford Wharf, Maxwell asked, or Rillford Weighhouse. My father often shortened locations by function rather than ownership. Vale consulted a route book. Portman Lime Works receives deliveries through Rillford. The road cart is weighed before the coal is transferred toward the canal side works. Ruth pointed to the figures. Then, these may be the weights before and after the false entries were made. Maxwell studied the columns. Can you prove that? Not from this book alone. What would you need? The Rillford Weighhouse record and the official standard used to test its balance. Before Maxwell could answer, a footman entered with a salver. Upon it lay a card edged in dark green and a folded note sealed with the Portman crest. Vale broke the seal at Maxwell's nod and read aloud. Lady Eugenia Portman denied any knowledge of duplicate tokens. She further stated that Miss Bromley's conclusions threatened the reputation of an old commercial concern and requested a public demonstration of the alleged weight discrepancy before county subscribers, merchants, and estate witnesses. If Ruth's figures were sound, Eugenia wrote, no honest woman could object to proving them openly. The insult rested beneath the courtesy like a blade beneath silk. She wants a spectacle, Vale said. She wants a failure, Ruth replied. Maxwell took the note. You are not required to submit to this. Ruth closed her father's book. If I refuse, she will say the numbers survive only in private rooms. And if she has prepared the conditions, then we examine the conditions before we trust the result. Maxwell looked at the handkerchief wrapped around her finger, then at Daniel's figures. No conclusion about your father will be announced without you present. No page will leave this room without your permission, and no demonstration will occur until we have seen Rillford ourselves. Ruth held his gaze. Then we go to the source. Vale turned one copied cart sheet toward them. Beside a disputed household number, the destination column listed Portman Lime Works. The commodity was not entered as household coal. It was marked Culm, low-grade waste, sold at a fraction of the proper value. Ruth placed Daniel's tally beside it. The weight figures did not match. Someone had stolen more than tokens. Someone had taught the scales to lie. By the 4th morning, the bandage around Ruth's finger had loosened, but the cut beneath it still stung whenever she turned a page. She ignored it. 18 households had been marked as supplied. 18 coal bins had to be seen. Maxwell arranged 2 estate carts. Mr. Vale brought the disputed ledger folios, and the rector sent 2 parish witnesses to record each visit. Pike remained barred from the coal yard, though his influence followed them through every cottage door. At Willow Row, the first bin held only grey dust and 3 broken cinders. At Mill Lane, an elderly tenant had burned the legs of a damaged stool. In the cottage beyond the smithy, a mother had moved 2 children into one bed to preserve warmth. Ruth asked the same questions each time. Had coal been delivered? Had a token been surrendered? Had any cart entered the yard? The answers remained unchanged. No, no, no. Mr. Vale wrote every statement. The parish witnesses signed or marked each page. Maxwell spoke little. He inspected each empty bin himself, crouching where necessary, despite the mud on his boots and the soot that settled along the hem of his coat. By the 9th cottage, his silence had become harder than anger. These entries were not estimates, Ruth said as they returned to the road. Each one records a precise allotment, 200 weight, a date, a witness mark, and none of the households received so much as a scuttle, Maxwell replied, which means someone needed the account to appear complete. The tokens supplied the household numbers, and the weight sheets supplied the coal. They reached the next cottage. A widow showed them a token still tied inside a linen purse, untouched since it had been issued. The number beside her name carried the same black crescent in the ledger. Maxwell looked from the token to the cold grate. "Have every disputed token described and witnessed," he told Vale. "Do not remove them from their owners unless they consent." "Yes, Your Grace." Ruth glanced at him. He had learned from Mrs. Webb's token that evidence could disappear into authority as easily as into dishonesty. Now he made possession explicit. The knowledge warmed something in her that had nothing to do with the weather. By noon, all 18 households had been inspected. None had received coal. Every disputed entry was false. They returned to the Brackenhurst yard, where the detained carts waited beneath a pale sky. The foreman had laid out the loading sheets, destination slates, and colliery-grade records on a trestle table. Ruth stood beside a cart described as carrying culm. The load did not resemble waste. Culm should have contained dust, shale, and small irregular pieces left after sorting. This coal had broad black faces, clean fractures, and pieces large enough to sit steadily in a domestic grate. "This was screened with household fuel," she said. The foreman shifted his weight. "That is what came down from the heap." "Which heap?" "Number 3. Ruth looked toward the sorting sheds. "Number 3 supplies cottage grade." The man did not answer. Maxwell came to stand on her other side. "Is Miss Bromley correct? The heaps can become mixed, Your Grace. Can 18 allotments become mixed on the same days that 18 household tokens are falsely redeemed?" The foreman's gaze fell to the ground. A younger yard worker stood several paces away, cap crushed between his hands. He had been avoiding Ruth since the inspection began. Now he looked toward the office where Pike had once watched every cart depart. "Speak," Maxwell said. The young man swallowed. "The slates were changed after loading, Your Grace." The foreman turned sharply. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do." The worker's voice shook, but he continued. "The carts came from number 3 heap. They were marked for cottages when they crossed the yard. Then Mr. Pike's clerk brought different slates from the office. Culm, Portman Lime Works, sometimes lime burners near Rillford. And the original slates," Ruth asked, "taken back inside. Who ordered the change?" "Mr. Pike's clerk said it came from Mr. Pike." The foreman closed his eyes. Maxwell looked at Vale. "Record the statement. This man's wages and lodging are protected while the inquiry proceeds." Relief crossed the worker's face so quickly that Ruth understood how long fear had held him silent. A carriage approached from the Hall Road before Vale finished writing. It was smaller than Maxwell's travelling carriage, but more elegant. Painted deep green with the Portman crest upon the door, Lady Eugenia Portman descended without waiting for a servant to lower the step fully. She wore dark velvet, trimmed in fur, her posture flawless, her expression composed for an audience. "Maxwell," she said, as if the coal yard belonged to a private conversation between equals. "You have ignored my note. I have been occupied." Her gaze moved to Ruth, then to the coal. "So I see." She approached the detained cart and lifted one gloved finger toward the load without touching it. "This is the material you claim was stolen from the cottages." "It is household-grade coal entered as culm," Ruth said. Eugenia's eyes rested on her with cool amusement. You copied colliery accounts for your father, Miss Bromley. That does not make you a coal viewer. No. Years spent checking sorting records taught me what the heaps contained. This coal has been screened for domestic use. The pieces are too large and too cleanly fractured to be entered honestly as culm. Coal breaks differently in every seam. Not after it has passed through the same screens. Eugenia looked toward Maxwell. You cannot suspend a commercial contract because a parish clerk finds meaning in the shape of a stone. Ruth reached into the cart and selected 2 pieces. One was broad and solid. The second bore the sharp edge left by recent sorting. She placed them beside a bucket of genuine culm taken from the waste heap. Dust and tiny fragments settled around the bucket's rim. This burns differently, travels differently, and is valued differently, Ruth said. Calling one, the other lowers the price on paper. It does not change what was loaded. Eugenia's expression did not alter, but her next words came more quickly. Then prove it publicly. Maxwell's gaze sharpened. Under whose conditions? Under conditions no one can call private favoritism. Rillford Weighhouse. Merchants, county relief subscribers, estate witnesses. Let Miss Bromley explain the figures and weigh the load before them. You want a spectacle, Ruth said. I want certainty. No, Ruth replied. You want the appearance of certainty. The yard went still. Eugenia smiled faintly. Then perhaps you are afraid the scale will disagree with you. Maxwell turned to Ruth rather than answering for her. Can the test be controlled fairly? If the balance is inspected first, if the official standard weight is produced from its proper chest, if the cart is weighed before and after unloading, if every figure is witnessed, then those will be the terms, Maxwell said. Eugenia looked displeased for the first time. You accept. I accept proof, not performance. She inclined her head. Tomorrow afternoon, then. After her carriage departed, Ruth climbed onto the inspection cart to compare its slate with the loading sheet. When she stepped down, the frozen wheel rut made the distance awkward. Maxwell extended his hand. He did not reach for her. He simply offered it. Ruth placed her uninjured hand in his and let him steady her to the ground. His grip was firm, brief, and careful. When she released him, she noticed a black streak across his cuff where he had leaned against the cart. Your coat has joined the evidence, she said. Maxwell looked down. A grave sacrifice. The corner of her mouth lifted. His answered smile was restrained, almost private, and gone before anyone else seemed to notice. Near dusk, a messenger returned from Rillford carrying a folded note from the Weighhouse clerk. Vale opened it before Ruth and Maxwell. The clerk had compared several Portman slate numbers with his arrival book. The carts recorded at Brackenhurst had not reached Rillford at the same declared weights. On paper, each had become lighter along an 11-mile road where no coal had supposedly been unloaded. The road to Rillford had frozen hard enough to rattle every window latch in the carriage. Ruth sat opposite Maxwell with Mrs. Cole beside her and Mr. Vale at the far end, his document case braced between his boots. A groom rode behind them. The journey from Brackenhurst took more than 2 hours, through bare hedgerows, low stone walls, and fields silvered by frost. No one wasted breath on polite conversation. The note from the Weighhouse clerk lay open on Maxwell's knee, its figures copied twice in Vale's hand. Cart after cart had left Brackenhurst under one declared weight and arrived at Rillford under another. The difference was too regular to be weather, road loss, or error. Ruth kept Daniel's tally book wrapped on her lap. The cut on her finger had nearly closed, though the skin pulled when she turned a page. Your father's entries begin 7 years ago, Vale said. The Rillford discrepancies continue into the present year. Then either the same method survived him, Ruth replied, or the men responsible learned that no one intended to look again. Maxwell's gaze remained on the winter road beyond the glass. My father signed one order and considered the matter finished. Ruth heard the judgment in his voice, but not superiority. He was judging the inheritance he had received. A signature can close an office, she said. It cannot close a fact. He looked at her then. The carriage lurched over a rut. Mrs. Cole caught the leather strap beside her shoulder, and Vale steadied his case. Maxwell did not answer until the wheels settled. No, he said, it cannot. Rillford Wharf appeared near midday, a dark line of warehouses and cranes beside the canal. Barges sat low in grey water beyond the lock gates. The Weighhouse stood apart from the larger sheds, built of soot-stained stone, with a broad arched entrance through which loaded carts could pass. A wooden balance beam crossed the interior above an iron platform set into the floor. The Weighhouse clerk, Mr. Harland, met them at the door with the lock-keeper and 2 Canal Company men. He bowed to Maxwell, then looked uncertainly at Ruth. Miss Bromley is conducting the technical examination, Maxwell said before the man could ask. You will answer her questions as you would answer mine. Harland's uncertainty became a tension. Yes, Your Grace. Inside. The cold had settled into the stone. Ruth opened Daniel's tally book beside the Canal Company arrival register. Vale placed a blank comparison sheet between them. The first Portman slate number matched an entry from Brackenhurst. The declared departure weight was written in one hand. The arrival weight, supposedly taken at Rillford, was lower by 300 hundredweight. The next differed by the same amount. So did the next. The loss is too precise, Ruth said. Coal may shift. A small amount may fall through a damaged board. It does not vanish in the same measure from 6 different carts. Harland frowned at his own register. The weights were called out from the platform. My clerk entered what he heard. Who operated the balance? Usually the lock porter. Sometimes Mr. Pike's clerk assisted when several carts arrived together. Ruth turned a page in Daniel's book. Beside one line stood R.W., followed by a cart number and the same 300 hundredweight difference. R.W., she said softly. Rillford Weighhouse. The lock-keeper, an older man named Seth Orme, leaned over the table. His face changed when he saw Daniel's handwriting. I remember him. Ruth looked up. My father came here. Twice. One winter after dark, then again a week later. Asked whether the balance had been tested. Asked who held the key to the standard chest. What did you tell him? That the company standard was kept beneath the west shelf. £56, officially stamped, used to test the beam before commercial weighings. Orme pointed across the room. A heavy oak chest stood under a shelf, its iron straps dulled by age. Who has access? Maxwell asked. Myself. Mr. Harland, the canal superintendent when he visits. Orme hesitated. And last month, Mr. Pike's clerk borrowed the key. Vale's pen stopped. For what purpose? Said Brackenhurst, wished to compare its yard measures with ours. He returned the key before noon. Ruth crossed to the chest but did not touch it. Was the standard removed? I did not see it removed. Was the chest opened in your presence? No. Maxwell's expression hardened. Then it will remain closed until its contents can be examined before witnesses. Harland swallowed. Your Grace, Lady Eugenia has requested a demonstration tomorrow. She expects the standard to be used. Which is precisely why no one will touch it today, Ruth said. Harland looked to Maxwell. Maxwell nodded. Seal the keyhole. Vale produced paper and wax. Orme surrendered the key long enough for its number to be recorded, then retained it under a written acknowledgement. The chest itself remained in the Weighhouse. Ruth returned to the books. Daniel's entries now made sense. He had written the household's token number, the Brackenhurst departure weight, the Rillford arrival weight, and a small hooked mark beside every unexplained loss. The crescent in the present ledger was not his mark. It had been added by someone else to identify false redemptions. But the hook beneath it belonged to Daniel's method. He wasn't tracing missing household tokens alone, Ruth said. He was tracing the difference between what the carts carried and what the books claimed they carried. Vale followed the columns. The household allotments created the official explanation for coal leaving the yard. The culm entries reduced its value. The altered Rillford weights concealed the true quantity delivered. And the duplicate tokens matched each private shipment to a household number, Maxwell said. Ruth nodded. 3 records, 1 theft. Orme removed his cap. Mr. Bromley asked me to sign a statement. I refused. The admission seemed to cost him. Pike's clerk had already told men Daniel was stealing from the estate. I had a wife and 2 girls. I thought silence would keep my place. Ruth looked at him. She had imagined for years that no one had seen what happened to her father. It was worse to learn that people had seen and chosen safety. Yet Orme's shame was real, and she knew too well what dependence could demand. "Will you speak now?" she asked. "Yes, miss, before whoever hears it." Vale recorded his statement. When the final line was signed, Harland led Mrs. Cole and the others to the adjoining office to arrange certified copies. Ruth remained beside the table, studying Daniel's last complete entry. Maxwell stood across from her. For a time, neither spoke. Beyond the wall, water pressed against the lock gates with a slow, steady force. "He knew," Ruth said. "Not everything, but enough. And my house made certain he carried the blame. Your father signed the dismissal. Pike shaped the case. My father preferred order to uncertainty. I have spent years calling that prudence." Maxwell looked toward the sealed chest. "Now I see what private order can protect." Ruth closed the tally book. "You did not create what happened 7 years ago." "No, but I inherited the habit that permitted it." His voice lowered. "When I arrived at Brackenhurst, I believed authority meant making the correct decision quickly. I did not ask who had been forced into silence before the reports reached me. I did not ask who paid for my efficiency." Ruth saw no performance in him. A duke could confess regret and still expect absolution as his due. Maxwell expected nothing. He set one bare hand upon the table between them, palm open. He did not cross the distance. He left the choice where it belonged. Ruth looked at his hand, then at his face. She placed her own hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers. There was no urgency in the touch. He held her as though steadiness itself were a promise he did not yet have the right to make aloud. "My father's name matters to me," Ruth said, "but so do the families who are cold now. I will not let the inquiry become only a monument to him. Nor will I. And tomorrow's test must be real. No private adjustment. No result accepted because it favors either of us." "Agreed." She felt his thumb shift once against the side of her hand, then become still. "Your opinion of me has come to matter more than it should," he said. Ruth's breath caught, not because the words were grand, but because they were not. He had offered uncertainty where another man might have offered charm. "Perhaps it matters exactly as much as it should," she replied. Neither released the other at once. When Mrs. Cole returned, Ruth withdrew her hand without embarrassment. and Maxwell let it go without pretending he had not wished to keep it. Harland carried a newly delivered notice sealed in dark green wax. Lady Eugenia had arranged the public weigh test for the following afternoon. Merchants, county relief subscribers, estate witnesses, and representatives from Portman Lime Works had been invited. Ruth read the final line twice. The balance, the notice declared, would be tested before all present using the official £56 standard. Across the room, the sealed chest waited beneath the west shelf. Someone had already borrowed its key. By the following afternoon, Rillford Wharf had become a theatre. Merchants stood beneath the warehouse awning in dark coats. County relief subscribers gathered near the canal wall, and tenant witnesses clustered behind a rope line where they could see the Weighhouse platform. Lady Eugenia Portman had arranged the scene with the precision of a hostess receiving guests for dinner. Even the cart selected for the demonstration stood cleanly positioned beneath the balance beam, its slate facing outward, so that the chalked destination could be read from the yard. Ruth arrived with Mrs. Cole, Mr. Vale, and Maxwell. The sealed packets containing Token A and Token B remained in Vale's evidence chest at Brackenhurst Hall. They had not been brought to the public test. Today's question concerned weight, not identity. Ruth carried Daniel's tally book beneath her arm and a copied sheet of the disputed cart figures in her reticule. Pike waited beside the platform as though his removal from direct control of the coal yard had been no more than a temporary misunderstanding. "Your Grace," he said, bowing to Maxwell, "everything has been prepared according to Lady Eugenia's request." "According to the conditions Miss Bromley stated," Maxwell corrected. Pike's eyes moved to Ruth. Naturally. The oak chest beneath the west shelf still bore Mr. Vale's paper seal across the keyhole. Orme displayed the numbered key before the witnesses. Vale inspected the seal, cut it, and recorded the time. Orme unlocked the chest. Inside lay a dark iron weight bearing a stamped crown and the figures 56 lb. Pike's clerk lifted it with both hands and set it beside the balance. The iron struck the stone floor with a dull, contained sound. Ruth noticed it, not a clear ring, not the dense note she remembered from the colliery standards Daniel had tested against one another. A dead sound. Pike began before she could speak. "The official £56 standard has been produced from the company chest before witnesses. The beam will now be tested." The clerk placed the weight upon one side of the mechanism. A counterweight moved along the arm until the beam settled near level. Harland read the position aloud. Vale wrote it down. Ruth stepped closer to the platform. The cart must be weighed loaded, then emptied completely, then weighed again. The difference gives the coal weight. No slate figure should be accepted in place of the balance. A merchant near Eugenia murmured that everyone present understood a common weighing. Ruth ignored him. The same operator must handle both measurements. The beam must be allowed to settle without a hand upon it. Every number must be called before it is written. "We aren't schoolboys, Miss Bromley," Pike said. Then, "Precision should not offend you." A few workers lowered their faces to hide their reactions. Maxwell remained beside Vale rather than taking the center of the demonstration. He had promised proof, not performance, and Ruth knew he was allowing her to lead. The loaded cart rolled onto the platform. The horses were unhitched and taken several yards away. Harland moved the sliding weight while Pike's clerk stood close beside him. The beam swayed, slowed, and stopped. Harland called the figure. It was lower than the Brackenhurst departure entry, by almost exactly the amount Daniel had repeatedly marked. Yet, when the coal was unloaded into the receiving bay and the empty cart weighed again, the calculated load appeared to match the Portman record rather than Ruth's estimate. A ripple passed through the assembled merchants. Pike turned toward the crowd. The cart has been weighed openly. Its load agrees with the commercial entry. Miss Bromley's claim that household-grade coal has been concealed through false weights is unsupported. Ruth studied the beam. The result was not merely unfavorable. It was designed. The same neat discrepancy had appeared again, as if Daniel's figures had been used to construct the contradiction. "Test the standard a second time," she said. Pike smiled without warmth. The standard was produced from the sealed chest. "I heard it when it was set down. You heard iron touchstone." It rang dully. A merchant laughed. "Now the lady weighs coal by ear." Eugenia stepped forward, sympathy arranged upon her face. No one wishes to cause Miss Bromley pain. Her devotion to her father is understandable, but grief can persuade the mind to find patterns where none exist. Ruth looked at her. "The pattern existed before my grief." "Did it?" Eugenia's voice remained gentle. "Your father died under a cloud. 7 years later you discovered a scandal that places him among the righteous and places you beside the Duke of Dunleigh. Some might call that remarkably fortunate." The insult moved through the crowd more effectively because Eugenia never raised her voice. Ruth felt heat climb her throat. She did not look toward Maxwell. If she sought his protection now, Eugenia would make the glance itself part of the accusation. "My position beside His Grace is temporary and professional," Ruth said. "The empty coal bins are permanent facts. So are the duplicate household entries. Today's result does not erase either. It does suggest you don't understand the measurements upon which your accusations depend," Pike replied. "Open the chest again." Ruth pointed toward it. "Remove every article. Let Mr. Orme inspect the interior. Let Mr. Vale compare the standard's dimensions and stamp with the Canal Company description." Pike stepped between her and the shelf. "The test is concluded. Then you fear the examination. I refuse to prolong a public disturbance because you dislike an honest result." Ruth turned to Harland. Was the chest empty except for that weight? Harland hesitated. He had not looked beneath it. Everyone could see that. Pike raised his voice for the first time. "This demonstration is at an end." "No," Maxwell said. The single word silenced the yard. He walked forward and stopped beside Ruth, not in front of her. "The personal insinuations are at an end. Miss Bromley will not be dismissed from the inquiry because one test produced a disputed result." Eugenia's expression cooled. "Maxwell, the county has just watched her figures fail. The county has watched a balance move. It has not examined the instrument, the standard, or the records that contradict 18 empty households." He looked at Pike. "The scale and chest will remain secured. No component is to be removed." Pike bowed stiffly. "As your grace commands." The crowd dispersed in slow groups, merchants speaking with Eugenia and tenants gathering around Mrs. Cole. Ruth remained near the platform, long enough to watch Vale place a fresh seal across the chest. She wrote one sentence in her notebook. The displayed standard produced a dull sound when plates upon stone. She underlined it once. Maxwell approached her. "You were prepared for the result to be challenged," he said. "I was not prepared for a false result to be treated as final." "Do you believe the weight was altered?" "I believe the chest was not fully examined. I believe Pike wanted the demonstration stopped before it could be." Maxwell glanced toward the office where Pike had disappeared. Vale and I will remain until the scale is secured. Mrs. Cole will take you back to the inn." Ruth looked at him. "You are staying here?" For another hour. Nothing in his answer was false, yet something had closed behind his eyes. She recognized the habit he had confessed the previous day. The instinct to decide first and explain when the danger had passed. "What has Pike offered you?" Maxwell's silence answered before his words did. "He claims he can identify the remaining diverted coal and produce the records that lead to it." "Under what condition?" "That I delay informing the magistrates until morning." Ruth felt the cold move through her more sharply than the wind from the canal. "And you agreed, for one night. If the coal can be recovered before it is moved again, the families receive it sooner. You trusted Pike with notice that you intend to act against him. I gave him no promise of immunity. You gave him time." Maxwell lowered his voice. "I made the decision because 18 households are still at risk. You made it alone. There was no opportunity to consult you before he approached me. There was every opportunity to refuse him." He reached toward her, stopping before his hand touched her sleeve. Ruth stepped back. Maxwell let his hand fall. "He did not follow. My father was destroyed by men who preferred a private arrangement to an open question," she said. "They called it order. They called it protection. They called it avoiding scandal. You have chosen the same method because you believe your intention is kinder." Ruth, it was the first time he had spoken her given name. Under other circumstances, it might have mattered. Now it only made the hurt more precise. "I will not continue inside your private inquiry," she said. "I will continue searching for the truth. Without protection, with witnesses." Mrs. Cole approached from the yard. Ruth turned toward her. Behind them, Pike stood at the office window, watching. He had gained one night. Ruth looked once toward the resealed chest beneath the west shelf. The false test weight had struck stone like iron with an empty heart, somewhere inside or beneath that chest. The true standard was still waiting to be found. At 8 the next morning, Ruth returned to Rillford Weighhouse with Mrs. Cole, Mr. Orme, and 2 Canal Company witnesses. She had not slept enough to soften her anger, and she did not wish it softened. Maxwell's decision had given Pike a night. Whatever that night had purchased, she meant to discover before anyone called secrecy mercy again. The fresh paper seal remained across the standard chest. Mr. Vale's signature still crossed the wax. Orme produced the numbered key and waited while both witnesses examined the seal. "You asked that everything be witnessed," he said. "It will be." Ruth recorded the time. Orme cut the paper, turned the key, and lifted the lid. The dark iron weight used at the public demonstration sat near the front. Beneath folded sacking rested another weight of the same declared measure. Ruth did not touch either, set them beside one another. Orme lifted them in turn. The second required a visible change in his grip. When it met the stone floor, it gave a clear, solid ring. Mrs. Cole looked at Ruth. "That is the sound you expected." Yes, both weights bore a crown and the figures 56 lb, but the authentic standard carried an older official stamp beneath the handle. The object used during the demonstration had no such secondary mark. A fine seam ran around its middle. "The false one is hollow," Ruth said. Orme's face went grey. "Then someone placed it in the chest before yesterday. Or removed the true standard, used the substitute, and returned both afterward." She turned to the witnesses. "Record that the authentic standard remained in the chest, and that we found it beneath the sacking. It must not leave this room without a magistrate's order." One witness wrote, while the other measured both objects with the Weighhouse rule. The authentic weight matched the company description. The substitute was broader through the base. Ruth asked Orme to lock both inside again. They sealed the keyhole with paper bearing 4 signatures. Ruth kept only her notes and the written descriptions. The evidence stayed where it belonged. A horse entered the yard before they finished. Maxwell's groom dismounted and held out a folded note. His Grace asked that you receive this at once. Ruth opened it before Mrs. Cole. Pike had used the promised delay. A final coal cart had left Brackenhurst before dawn by the lower canal road, and the locked drawer in Pike's former office had been found empty. Maxwell had already notified 2 local magistrates and ordered the remaining coal yard records sealed. At the bottom, one sentence stood alone. I was wrong, and I will not hide the cost of it from you. Ruth folded the page. The admission did not erase what had happened. It did something more useful. It named it. By late morning, she had returned to her lodgings near the rectory. Mrs. Cole remained in the front room while Ruth copied the descriptions of both weights. At 11, the maid brought Maxwell's card. Ruth looked toward Mrs. Cole. Will you remain? Of course. Maxwell entered with road dust on his coat and fatigue beneath his eyes. He bowed to Mrs. Cole, then to Ruth. He did not ask for privacy. The magistrates have answered, he said. Mr. Alden and Sir William Crowther will receive statements this afternoon. Their clerk is preparing the necessary orders. Ruth placed her pages on the table. The authentic standard was still in the chest. So was the hollow substitute. We examined both before witnesses and sealed them again. Relief crossed his face, followed by shame. Then the demonstration was arranged from beginning to end. Yes, and my delay gave Pike time to send the last cart and clear his drawer. Yes, Maxwell accepted the word. He remained standing until Ruth indicated the chair opposite her. I told myself I was choosing the quickest way to recover the coal, he said. That was not the whole truth. I trusted my power to manage Pike more than I trusted your demand for a public process. I believed that because my intention was protection, secrecy became harmless. Ruth said nothing. He met her eyes. It did not. I placed evidence at risk. I allowed the man under suspicion to decide what I might learn. I repeated the habit that condemned your father after promising you I understood it. His voice did not seek pity. I am sorry, Ruth. I don't ask you to excuse me. Mrs. Cole lowered her eyes to her sewing. What have you changed? Ruth asked. The magistrates now control evidence that may bear upon a crime. Vale will record every transfer. No private bargain will be offered to Pike or Lady Eugenia. The workers who speak will retain wages and lodging under my written protection. I will make no announcement concerning Daniel Bromley without you present. Those are beginnings. Name the rest. Ruth had prepared the conditions on the journey back. First, criminal evidence remains under magistrate authority, even when it lies on your land. Second, every movement of an object or paper is witnessed and entered when it occurs. Third, any worker who speaks is protected from dismissal, lost wages, or eviction until the matter is resolved. Fourth, I lead the technical presentation when the evidence is heard. No man may summarize my findings while I stand silent behind him. Maxwell held her gaze. All 4, not as a favor. No, because the inquiry will fail without them. And if my conclusions embarrass House Kingscote, then House Kingscote will endure embarrassment. If they implicate your father's judgment, then his judgment will be named accurately. If I disagree with you before witnesses, you will disagree with me before witnesses. Something inside Ruth braced since the Weighhouse yard, eased by a degree. Not forgiveness, not yet. Maxwell drew a folded paper from his coat. It was a written order bearing his signature and Vale's witness line. The 4 conditions had been set down almost exactly as she had spoken them, with space for amendments. You prepared this before coming. I knew an apology without surrendered control would be another form of control. Ruth read every line. She added a phrase requiring witnesses' copies to remain outside the estate office. Maxwell agreed and initialed it. Mrs. Cole witnessed both signatures. I will return to the inquiry, Ruth said. Maxwell released a breath, but he did not smile as though he had won. Thank you. Don't thank me for doing what the families require. Then I will thank you for allowing me to do it beside you. He rose. At the door, he paused. The final cart took the lower canal road. A rider saw it less than an hour from Rillford Lock. Ruth thought of Daniel's hooked route marks and the lower crossing he had noted beside a winter shipment. Then Pike is avoiding the main Weighhouse. That is my belief. It is more than belief. My father marked a secondary road near the lock. I can identify it. Will you show the magistrate's clerk? Yes. Maxwell inclined his head and turned to leave. Before he reached the threshold, Ruth stepped forward and touched his sleeve. The contact was small and freely given. Maxwell became still, but did not make it more. I heard your apology, she said. His eyes met hers. I will spend the rest of this inquiry making certain you can believe it. Ruth released him. Outside, hoofbeats approached at speed. A rider pulled up before the rectory gate and called for the Duke. The final coal cart had been sighted on the lower canal road. It was already nearing Rillford Lock. Ruth recognized the lower canal road from a mark her father had drawn 7 years earlier. It was not a proper map. Daniel had sketched only 3 bends, a narrow bridge, and a hooked line beside the words Winter Gate. Yet when Ruth laid the tally book beside Orme's road plan, the meaning became clear. The main road entered Rillford beside the Weighhouse. The lower road descended toward an older lock crossing, where carts could reach the Portman side. Without passing the public balance, he knew they were avoiding the Weighhouse, Ruth said. The hook marks the lower gate. Maxwell stood across the rectory table with Mr. Vale and the magistrate's clerk, Mr. Henshaw. The rider who had brought the warning waited near the door, still breathing hard from the road. How long before the cart reaches it? Maxwell asked. Less than an hour, Your Grace, the rider replied. The road is frozen, but the team was moving quickly. Henshaw closed his notebook. The constable is at Rillford already. I can authorize the cart to be held while the magistrates examine the statements, but we must preserve every object as found. Agreed, Ruth said. The authentic standard weight must be present if the load is to be tested. Orme nodded. I will take it from the chest before witnesses. Only the authentic standard, Ruth said. The hollow substitute remains locked where it was found. Henshaw recorded the instruction. Maxwell looked at Ruth. You should travel with Mrs. Cole in the second carriage. I intend to. The lower road is steep, which is why someone who understands Daniel's marks must be there. His expression tightened with concern, but he did not argue. Then we leave now. They reached Rillford beneath a colourless sky. Orme, Henshaw, and 2 canal witnesses entered the Weighhouse first. The paper seal across the chest remained intact. They examined the signatures, cut the seal, and opened the lid. The hollow substitute stayed beneath the front sacking. Orme lifted the solid official standard from the rear of the chest and set it into a wooden carrying crate. Henshaw recorded the crown stamp. the figures 56 LB, the secondary mark beneath the handle, and the time of removal. Vale tied the crate with cord and sealed the knot. The chest was locked again with the substitute still inside, then sealed under fresh paper bearing 4 signatures. Only after that transfer was complete did they take the authentic standard toward the lower lock. Maxwell, Vale, the constable, Orme, and Henshaw travelled in the first carriage. Ruth followed with Mrs. Cole in the second. The lower canal road narrowed between a stone embankment and a frozen drainage ditch. Bare branches scraped the carriage roof. When they reached the crossing, the lock-keeper had already closed the timber barrier across the road. Beyond it stood the missing coal cart, its horses stamped against the cold. A slate hung at the driver's bench, chalked with the word QM. Pike stood beside the rear wheel. He wore no expression of surprise. "Your Grace," he said, "this is an estate delivery. You have no cause to obstruct it." Maxwell descended from the carriage. "The magistrate's clerk has cause to hold a cart believed connected to false estate entries." Henshaw displayed the written authority. "No one is to alter the load, slate, harness, or cart fittings until they are recorded." Ruth approached with Mrs. Cole and stopped several paces from the horses. The coal lay uncovered. Even at a distance, she could see broad, clean pieces above the sideboards. "That is household grade," she said. Pike looked at her with open contempt. "You have already failed one public weighing, because a hollow standard was used." The driver glanced sharply toward Pike. Henshaw heard it. "You will explain that statement at the proper inquiry, Miss Bromley. For now, tell me what must be examined." Ruth pointed to the slate. "Record the declared commodity, then compare the load against the authentic standard. The cart must be weighed as found before anything is removed." The lower lock had a smaller commercial balance used for local tolls. Orme inspected its beam and bearings, while Vale opened the carrying crate. The official 56-pound weight was removed before witnesses and placed upon the test plate. The beam settled correctly. Henshaw recorded the result. The horses were unhitched and led aside. The loaded cart rolled onto the platform. Ruth watched the arm rise, sway, and settle. Orme called the figure. It exceeded the culm entry by more than 400 weight. "Household grade quantity entered as waste," Ruth said. "The same method Daniel recorded." Pike stepped toward the driver. "Take the team around. This has gone far enough." The constable blocked him. "The cart is held. It belongs to Dunleigh. The evidence does not belong to anyone's convenience," Henshaw replied. Pike moved past him and reached for the brake lever. The driver caught the reins in confusion. One horse shied at the sudden pull. The cart jolted backward off the edge of the platform. Ruth had been standing beside the timber rail, watching the slate. The wheel lurched toward the post. Maxwell reached her first. He caught her around the upper arms and drew her clear. Her left wrist struck the rail as she turned. Pain flashed from her hand to her elbow. The cart stopped against the wooden chock. No one fell. The horses were steadied within moments. Maxwell released Ruth as soon as she was safely balanced. "Are you hurt?" "My wrist." She cradled it against her coat. Mrs. Cole came to her side. "Can you move your fingers?" Ruth did so carefully. The movement hurt, but nothing felt broken. "Yes." Maxwell's face had gone pale beneath his controlled expression. "You should sit." After the slate is secured, he looked as though he wanted to protest. Instead, he turned to Henshaw. "Please continue." The clerk removed the slate from its hook. Behind it, the wood bore 2 fresh wire scratches. A short loop of twisted wire remained caught around the iron bracket. but no token hung from it. Ruth nodded toward the marks. That is where the numbered token was attached. Henshaw recorded the slate's wording, dimensions, chalk marks, and wire loop. Before placing it in Vale's canvas evidence wrapper, the driver twisted his cap between his hands. "I've carried them before." Pike looked at him. "Say nothing." Maxwell's voice became very quiet. "Mr. Pike no longer gives orders here." The driver swallowed. "The numbered pieces go with the slates. At Portman Works, the receiving clerk takes both. He enters the number in a private book, then gives me a receipt for Pike's office." "Did you know the numbers belonged to households?" Ruth asked. "No, miss. I thought they were delivery codes." "Where are the codes made?" "I don't know. But the receiving clerk keeps a metal die in the counting shed. I saw it when he replaced a broken token last month. The private daybook is kept beside it." Henshaw wrote every word, then read the statement back. The driver confirmed it and made his mark. The cart remained under constable guard. The authentic standard was returned to its crate, retied and resealed before witnesses. Ruth watched each action through the ache in her wrist. Nothing would vanish into a private drawer tonight. Only when the evidence had been secured did the tension leave her knees. She stepped away from the others toward the canal wall. Maxwell followed but stopped before reaching her. "Ruth." She turned. The fear he had concealed during the inquiry was visible now. "When the cart moved, I thought." He did not finish. Ruth crossed the remaining distance herself and rested her forehead against his chest. Maxwell went still. His hands remained at his sides. "May I hold you?" he asked. "Yes." His arms came around her carefully, avoiding her injured wrist. Ruth placed her right arm around him and let herself breathe against the wool of his coat. The embrace held no command and asked for no forgiveness. It was simply relief, shared between two people who had nearly lost more than evidence. Maxwell's cheek rested briefly against her hair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You moved before anyone else could. I would do it again." Ruth drew back enough to meet his eyes. "Next time, listen before you decide alone." "I will." Behind them, the constable called for Vale. The Portman counting shed would have to be searched before dawn. Somewhere inside it waited the die that had made 2 number 47s and the book that could show who had profited from every cold hearth. Ruth woke the next morning to the steady ache of her left wrist and the sharper memory of Maxwell's arms around her beside the frozen lock. Mrs. Cole had wrapped the joint before they left Rillford, and the rector's wife had insisted that Ruth spend the night in the warmer guest chamber rather than return to her own narrow lodgings. By 11 o'clock, the swelling had not worsened. She could move her fingers, though turning the wrist sent a warning through her forearm. The physician who served the parish had examined it at dawn and declared there was no break. Rest, a cool cloth, and patience were his prescriptions. Ruth found the last of these the most difficult. On the table, near the window, lay the magistrate's, clerk's, receipt for the route slate and the driver's signed statement, and a copy of the description made when the authentic standard weight had been resealed in its carrying crate. The original objects remained under official custody. Ruth had checked every line twice. Nothing had disappeared. Nothing had been quietly returned to the hands that wished it forgotten. Mrs. Cole entered with a calling card upon a small silver tray. "His Grace is downstairs." Ruth looked at the clock. The hour was proper. "Please ask him to come up and stay in the adjoining room." "I had no intention of going farther." Mrs. Cole's expression softened, "though I may discover a sudden interest in the linen press." Maxwell entered a few minutes later. He had changed from the mud-streaked coat he had worn at the lock, but fatigue remained in the set of his shoulders. His gaze went first to Ruth's bandaged wrist. He stopped at a respectful distance. "How is it?" "Bruised. Nothing more." "The physician is certain." "As certain as physicians permit themselves to be." A faint breath left him, almost a laugh and not quite relief. "May I sit?" "Yes." Mrs. Cole withdrew through the open connecting door, leaving it wide enough to preserve propriety and narrow enough to grant them privacy of tone. Maxwell took the chair opposite Ruth. For several moments, neither spoke. The silence did not feel empty. It held the memory of fear, apology, and the embrace she had chosen after the cart nearly struck her. Maxwell looked down at his hands. "When the wheel moved toward you, I believed I was about to lose you." Ruth's heart tightened. He had nearly said as much at the lock, then stopped because she was injured and shaken. Now he spoke without using distress as permission. "You didn't," she said. "No, but I understood something I had been avoiding." He lifted his eyes. "My concern for you is no longer something I can place neatly beside the inquiry and call separate." Ruth did not look away. "Nor is mine for you." His expression changed, though he remained still. "I have spent most of my life believing restraint was the same as honesty. It isn't. Sometimes restraint is only fear dressed well. What are you afraid of? That I will ask for more than I have earned? That my title will make agreement too easy and refusal too costly? That I will mistake your gratitude for affection?" Ruth's right hand rested upon the table. "I'm not grateful to you for believing evidence after I placed it before you. No, I'm not grateful that you corrected your own mistake. You were required to do so. Yes, and I did not hold you yesterday because you are a duke." Maxwell's breath caught. Ruth continued before courage deserted her. "I held you because I wanted to." Something unguarded entered his face. He rose, but did not cross the space between them. "Ruth, may I come closer?" "You may." He moved to the chair beside hers and sat angled toward her, leaving room enough for choice. His gaze fell once more to her wrapped wrist. "I won't touch that hand. I know. I meant what I said at the lock. I would move again if you were in danger. And I meant what I said after. Next time, listen before you decide alone." "I will." The promise was quiet, without defense. Ruth studied the man before her. Maxwell had not become trustworthy. Because he had pulled her from a moving cart, he had become trustworthy because he had returned authority he had wrongly taken, named the harm without excuse, and accepted conditions that limited his own power. Protection might stir the heart. Accountability allowed it to remain open. He raised one hand, stopping before her cheek. "May I touch you?" "Yes." His fingertips rested lightly along the side of her face. The contact was deliberate and reverent, nothing like possession. Ruth turned into it by the smallest degree. Maxwell's eyes lowered to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. "May I kiss you?" The question carried no assumption, no rank, no demand disguised as tenderness. Ruth stood, careful of her wrist, and closed the distance herself. "Yes." Maxwell rose with her. His hand remained against her cheek as he bent toward her slowly enough that she could refuse at any moment. Ruth placed her uninjured right hand against his chest and met him halfway. The kiss was warm, restrained, and more intimate for its patience. It did not rush, it asked, and she answered. When he began to draw back, Ruth followed by a breath, choosing one more moment before letting the distance return. Maxwell's forehead rested briefly against hers. Neither spoke at once. Ruth felt the steady beat beneath her palm. "That was not gratitude," she said softly. His mouth curved. No, it was not. She stepped back first, though her hand lingered against his coat before falling. Maxwell did not attempt another kiss. The restraint pleased her because it was now shared rather than imposed. "Whatever happens between us," Ruth said, "the inquiry proceeds exactly as agreed. Yes, if the evidence leads to Lady Eugenia, you will not protect her family's standing. I will not. If it leads to failures within House Kingscote, they will be named. And if gossip claims I used affection to influence you," Maxwell's expression cooled. "It already has." He drew a folded sheet from his coat and placed it on the table. It was a copy of a note circulated among 2 county subscribers that morning. The language was careful. It suggested that Miss Bromley's unusual access to the Duke explained the continued inquiry after her public failure. Lady Eugenia's name appeared nowhere, but the phrasing carried her polished cruelty. Ruth read it once. "She wants any proof I present to look like a favor granted by you. Then the proof must stand, where neither of us controls it, before the magistrates, and at the Weighhouse." Ruth set the note aside. "Good." Maxwell's gaze held hers. "You are not troubled by what they will say. I am troubled. I am not ruled. That distinction may be the bravest thing I have ever heard. Don't admire it too much. I intend to make it inconvenient." This time, his smile came fully. It changed him more than she expected. A knock sounded from the outer room. Mrs. Cole returned carrying a sealed message from Mr. Henshaw. Maxwell opened it in Ruth's presence. The 2 local magistrates had reviewed the driver's statement, the route slate record, and the descriptions of the authentic and hollow weights. They had authorized a search of the Portman counting shed at first light. A constable, Mr. Vale, the furnace clerk, Ruth, and Maxwell were permitted to attend. All recovered objects were to be listed and sealed immediately. Ruth read the authorization, noting the witnesses and limits. The die and private daybook may still be there. "If Pike has not reached them first," Maxwell said. Another line at the bottom changed his expression. "What is it?" He passed her the message. The furnace clerk had sent word through Henshaw. Lady Eugenia had ordered the counting shed cleared before dawn. Ruth folded the paper carefully. The warmth of Maxwell's kiss still lived upon her lips, but it did not blur the danger. Then we arrived before the men she sent. The Portman counting shed stood at the edge of the lime works, where the canal mist mingled with coal smoke and turned the first light of morning grey. Ruth arrived before sunrise in a closed carriage with Mrs. Cole, her left wrist still wrapped beneath her glove. Maxwell rode ahead with Mr. Vale, the constable, and Mr. Henshaw, while the 2 magistrates followed in a second carriage carrying the written authority for the search. No one entered until Mr. Alden had read the order aloud at the shed door, and Sir William Crowther had confirmed the limits of it. The search concerned records, dies, weights, token materials, and payment books connected to Dunleigh coal shipments. It did not permit a general seizure of Portman property. "Everything found is to remain where it lies until it has been described," Henshaw said. "Nothing passes from one hand to another without a recorded transfer." Ruth looked at Maxwell. He met her gaze and inclined his head once. Her conditions were no longer private promises. They governed the room. The furnace clerk who had sent the warning waited beside the door, pale and sleepless. His name was Samuel Kerr. He had worked at Portman Lime Works for 9 years and had kept his knowledge silent for nearly 3 of them. "Lady Eugenia ordered the shed cleared before dawn," he said. "2 men came with packing crates. I told them the lower door had frozen shut. It bought perhaps half an hour. "Where are they now?" the constable asked. "In the furnace yard. They don't know the magistrates have arrived." Sir William instructed the constable to station a man at each exit. No one was detained merely for being present, but no records were to leave. Vale cut the company seal on the counting shed door only after Henshaw recorded its condition. Inside, the room smelled of lime dust, lamp oil, and old paper. A high desk stood beneath the window. Shelves lined one wall. A locked drawer occupied the center of a blackened counting cabinet. Beside it rested a small iron scale, 2 ledgers, and a tray of brass blanks. Ruth stopped before the tray. The blanks bore no numbers, but their diameter matched the 2 sealed tokens held in Vale's evidence chest at Brackenhurst Hall. "Record them," she said. Henshaw described the count, size, material, and location. Vale sketched the arrangement before anything was moved. Kerr pointed toward the locked drawer. The receiving clerk kept the die there. "Who has the key?" Sir William asked. Mr. Pike had one. Lady Eugenia had the other. Maxwell's expression did not change, but Ruth saw the anger settle behind it. The constable called the receiving clerk from the outer office. The man denied knowing where the key had gone. Mr. Alden authorized the drawer to be opened by a locksmith from the works, with everyone standing back. The lock yielded after several careful minutes. Inside lay a short steel die engraved with the Dunleigh crest and an adjustable number plate. Beside it rested a leather pouch containing loose numerals, including a 7 and a 4. No one touched them until Vale had described the drawer exactly as found. "Can this produce number 47? Henshaw asked. Ruth studied the plate without lifting it. If the 4 and 7 are set into the lower channel, yes, the crest plate matches the size and placement of the tokens already sealed. "You cannot say it made those specific tokens," Eugenia's voice said from the doorway. She entered in a dark traveling cloak, followed by an older steward from Portman House. She appeared composed, though the speed of her arrival showed in the color high on her cheeks. These works use numbered checks for many lawful purposes. Sir William faced her. "Lady Eugenia, you may observe. You may also answer questions. You may not direct the search. I have no wish to interfere. I wish only to prevent Mr. Pike's dishonesty from being confused with my family's business." Ruth turned toward her. "You are saying Pike acted alone?" "I am saying he managed the Dunleigh transactions. If he misrepresented their origin, he deceived us as well." Kerr looked toward the high desk. "The private daybook is beneath the false bottom." Eugenia's eyes moved to him. The glance was brief, but it carried years of hierarchy. Kerr lowered his head, then lifted it again. "I saw the receiving clerk enter household numbers there. I carried the book to Lady Eugenia twice." Vale examined the desk before touching it. A shallow compartment beneath the writing surface, released when the side molding was pressed. Inside lay a narrow daybook bound in green leather. Henshaw recorded its position. Vale opened it only after the magistrates agreed. The first pages listed dates, cart slate numbers, household numbers, declared culm weights, actual received weights, and payments. The entries were not vague. They repeated the same structure Ruth had traced from Brackenhurst to Rillford. Household number 12. Household number 31. Household number 54. Beside each appeared a payment total, and the initials E.P. Ruth felt no triumph. The figures represented rooms where people had slept in coats. "Turn to the most recent entry," she said. Vale did so. Number 47 appeared beside the date of the stopped Portman cart. The actual weight exceeded the declared culm weight by 300 weight. That links the token number to the payment record, Ruth said. The false household redemption hid the departure. The culm description lowered the recorded value. The altered weight concealed the quantity. Eugenia stepped nearer. Initials prove nothing. Pike could have written them. Then the handwriting must be compared, Vale said, not presumed. Henshaw examined the margins. 2 instructions had been written in a different hand from the main entries. One ordered the receiving clerk to continue accepting numbered brass checks, despite Dunleigh hesitation. The other directed that the public demonstration use the lighter standard previously prepared. Beneath both stood Eugenia Portman's full signature. The Portman steward closed his eyes. Eugenia did not. Those directions concerned efficiency, she said. I did not know the checks represented relief households. Kerr spoke before fear could silence him again. Your ladyship asked why one cottage number had been used twice. You said the repetition didn't matter if the estate ledger closed. The room became still. Sir William instructed Henshaw to record the statement and read it back to Kerr. The clerk confirmed every word. The search continued. On the lower shelf of the counting cabinet, behind a stack of lime invoices, they found a second hollow iron test weight. It resembled the substitute still sealed inside the chest at Rillford Weighhouse. But this one bore unfinished file marks around the copied crown stamp. Ruth asked that it be set upon the floor by the locksmith rather than lifted by any interested party. When it touched the boards, it gave the same dead sound she had heard at the false weighing. Describe it as a separate object, she said. It is not the weight already secured at Rillford. Henshaw recorded that distinction. Every item was numbered. The die became item 1. The loose numerals became item 2. The green daybook became item 3. The second hollow weight became item 4. 2 signed receipts found beneath the book became items 5 and 6. Each was wrapped, tied, sealed, and transferred to the constable under the magistrate's authority. Nothing went to Maxwell. Nothing went to Ruth. Eugenia watched her own signature disappear beneath official paper. You have made this into a public spectacle, she said to Maxwell. No, he replied. The theft made it public when families were left cold. Ruth looked toward the limeworks beyond the window. The final inquiry should be held at Rillford Weighhouse. Mr. Alden raised an eyebrow. Why there? Because that is where the false weights altered the truth. The authentic standard remains there. The substitute from the demonstration remains there. The balance can be tested before the same people who watched it used against me. The carts can be weighed where Daniel recorded them. Sir William considered this, then nodded. The inquiry will be held at the Weighhouse. Tomorrow morning, witnesses will be summoned under our direction. Outside, the sky had brightened over the canal. Workers gathered at a distance. Uncertain whether the search meant lost wages or freedom from Pike, Maxwell instructed Vale to prepare written protection for every cooperating worker, and to continue wages while the works stood under examination. He did not look to Ruth for praise. As they stepped from the shed, he said quietly, "Whatever you decide after this is over, I will stand beside you tomorrow." "Even if I never marry you?" Ruth asked. The words came before caution could reshape them. Maxwell's gaze held hers, even then. Her left wrist still ached beneath its wrapping, so Ruth reached with her uninjured right hand and took his. The choice was hers. Maxwell closed his fingers gently around hers, but did not draw her closer. For a moment, they stood between the counting shed and the canal, joined not by rescue or promise, but by the truth They had agreed neither of them would own alone. At dawn the next day, Rillford Weighhouse would open before tenants, workers, merchants, and magistrates. The 2 sealed tokens would be brought from Brackenhurst. The authentic standard would be removed under witness, and the coal would be weighed again. At dawn, Rillford Weighhouse opened beneath a sky the colour of iron. Tenants from Brackenhurst stood beside canal workers, merchants, county relief subscribers, and clerks from the Portman works. No rope divided rank from consequence. The 2 local magistrates, Mr. Alden and Sir William Crowther, took their places beneath the broad balance beam, with Mr. Henshaw at a writing table and the constable beside the sealed evidence cases. Ruth entered with Mrs. Cole and Mr. Vale. Her left wrist remained wrapped beneath her glove, though the swelling had begun to fade. Maxwell walked a few paces behind them. He did not move ahead to claim the centre. Vale carried the 2 token packets from his locked evidence chest at Brackenhurst Hall. The seals bearing his mark and the dated witness signatures remained intact. Henshaw examined each packet, read the labels aloud, and recorded the transfer from Vale to the magistrate's table. Token A was identified as the genuine unpunched household token entrusted by Mrs. Webb. Token B was identified as the duplicate found behind the Portman cart slate in the Brackenhurst yard. Neither packet was opened until Mr. Alden gave permission. The paper came away carefully. Ruth placed the 2 brass discs side by side upon a clean white cloth. A murmur passed through the Weighhouse. The same crest, the same number, the same tiny defect above the 7. Only token B bore the faint abrasion left by wire. Mrs. Webb stepped forward. She looked frightened by the number of important faces, but Ruth stood beside her rather than behind the magistrates. "Is this the token issued to your household?" Henshaw asked, indicating token A. "It is. Did you surrender it before the morning you brought it to Miss Bromley?" "I didn't. Did you receive the coal entered beside your number?" "I didn't receive so much as a basket." Driver of the Portman cart came next. He confirmed that token B had been wired behind the destination slate when the cart left Pike's office, and that Portman's receiving clerk used such numbered tokens to match deliveries to private payment entries. Ruth looked from the 2 discs to the people whose coal bins she had inspected. Then she faced the magistrates. "If this household spent its token," she asked, her voice carrying beneath the rafters, "why did its coal arrive here?" Silence answered before any man did. Pike stood with the constable near the side wall. Lady Eugenia waited several feet away with the Portman steward. Her posture remained faultless, but her hands were clasped too tightly around the handle of her reticule. Mr. Alden ordered the Weighhouse chest examined. The paper seal, applied after the authentic standard, had been returned from the lower lock, remained unbroken. Orme displayed the numbered key. Henshaw read the recorded seal marks. Before 6 witnesses, Orme opened the chest. The solid 56-pound standard and the hollow substitute were removed separately. The authentic weight carried the crown, the figures 56 LB, and the secondary company stamp beneath the handle. The substitute carried only the copied crown and figures. When Orme set the authentic weight upon the stone, it gave a clear iron ring. The false one answered with the dull sound Ruth had heard during the public demonstration. The substitute was used when Miss Bromley's figures appeared to fail. Vale said. The authentic standard remained concealed beneath the sacking. The balance was tested with the solid weight. Its beam settled true. A detained Portman cart, still bearing household-grade coal, and the false culm slate was rolled onto the platform. The horses were removed. Every figure was called aloud before Henshaw wrote it. The cart was weighed loaded, then emptied under witness, then weighed again. The true coal weight exceeded the Portman entry by 400 weight. Ruth opened Daniel Bromley's tally book at the corresponding pattern. My father recorded the same discrepancy 7 years ago. Household numbers concealed the departure. Culm entries reduced the stated value. False weights concealed the quantity received. Pike's composure finally cracked. Bromley kept private notes because he was stealing from the estate. Then why do his figures match a cart weighed 9 years after his dismissal? Ruth asked. Pike had no answer. The constable opened the sealed package containing the route slate from the lower lock. The wire loop marks matched the abrasion on token B. Next came the items recovered from the Portman counting shed. The magistrates examined the duplicate die, the loose numerals 4 and 7, the green private daybook, the second hollow test weight, and the 2 signed receipts. Each seal was checked before it was broken. Under Mr. Alden's direction, the receiving clerk fitted the 4 and 7 into the die. He struck a fresh brass blank once. The resulting token bore the Dunleigh crest and the number 47 in the same placement as token B. Ruth did not call the demonstration proof by itself. She pointed instead to the complete chain. The die explains how the duplicate was made. The route slate explains why it travelled with the cart. The private daybook explains why the number mattered at Portman Works. The false household ledger explains how the coal disappeared from Brackenhurst accounts. The hollow weights explain how its quantity was reduced on paper. Vale opened the green daybook. Household number 47 appeared beside the stopped shipment. The actual weight, false culm weight, and payment total occupied the same line. In the margin stood Lady Eugenia Portman's signed instruction to continue accepting numbered brass cheques. A second instruction ordered the lighter standard used for the public demonstration. Eugenia lifted her chin. I acted to preserve the works. Hundreds depend upon it. Pike assured me the coal came from surplus estate stock. Ruth faced her. Then why use household numbers? Accounting convenience. Why disguise household-grade coal as culm? Commercial classification. Why order a lighter standard? Eugenia's restraint sharpened into contempt, because men who understand industry do not allow every parish woman with a grievance to disrupt an enterprise. A stir moved through the tenants. Ruth did not raise her voice. Debt does not turn stolen warmth into honest commerce. Pike stepped forward as far as the constable allowed. The Portman Works would have closed. Families there would have suffered as well. I found a way to preserve both estates. You preserved the works by choosing which families were permitted to freeze, Ruth replied. You then made their own numbers certify the theft. Eugenia looked toward Maxwell. You cannot allow a registrar to destroy 2 houses over administrative irregularities. Maxwell had remained silent through the evidence. Now he stepped beside Ruth, not before her. Rank is not evidence, he said, his voice carried to the far wall. Nor is inherited authority an excuse for refusing to examine what is done beneath it. He turned toward the tenants and workers. I delayed notifying the magistrates for 1 night because I believed I could recover the coal through a private bargain. That delay allowed Mr. Pike to move a final cart and attempt to remove records. Miss Bromley warned me against the very habit I repeated. The responsibility for that decision is mine. The admission shifted the room. Maxwell did not ask applause or forgiveness. He looked at Vale. The estate record concerning Daniel Bromley will be corrected. It will state that he identified irregularities in the coal accounts, that his dismissal occurred without an independent hearing, and that the accusation against him was unsupported. Then he looked at Ruth. It will also state that Ruth Bromley exposed the present fraud through her own skill, judgment, and courage. She is not merely the daughter of a wronged man. Ruth felt the words strike deeper than praise. They returned Daniel's name without taking hers away. Mr. Alden conferred briefly with Sir William. Pike and Eugenia were formally committed for trial on evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and falsification of records. The constable took custody of them. Maxwell cancelled the Portman coal contract and announced that no future household allotment would be recorded without recipient acknowledgement, actual cart weight, yard signature, and independent parish witness. The new system was designed with Miss Bromley, he said. She will lead technical administration. When the inquiry ended, the crowd moved slowly into the yard. Mrs. Webb touched Ruth's uninjured hand before leaving. Orme removed his cap to her. Maxwell waited until the magistrates, witnesses, and workers had dispersed. Beneath the covered awning beside the Weighhouse, the canal moved darkly beyond the lock gates. He extended his hand. Ruth placed her right hand in his. "I meant what I said inside," he told her, "about the record, about all of it, and there is something I would not say while the inquiry still required your freedom from any public pressure." His fingers closed gently around hers. "I love you, Ruth. You taught me that duty must be witnessed, not merely declared. You have also taught me that love without respect is only another form of possession." Ruth looked at the man who had failed her, named the failure, changed his conduct, and stood beside her while she spoke for herself. "I love you, Maxwell," she said, "but I will stand beside you, never silently behind you. Then stand beside me for the rest of my life." He drew a breath. "Will you marry me?" "Yes." The answer was freely given and wholly hers. Maxwell lifted her hand, but did not kiss it as though sealing a bargain. He waited. Ruth stepped closer, placed her right hand against his chest, and kissed him. He answered with quiet tenderness, one hand resting lightly at her waist while avoiding her injured wrist. When they parted, the balance beam above the Weighhouse door remained still. For the first time in 7 years, nothing in Rillford needed to be made lighter than the truth. By the first week of November 1847, winter had returned to Rillford with a white edge on the canal stones and frost along the iron rails of the Weighhouse. 9 months had passed since the inquiry, long enough for the assizes to hear the evidence, for Josiah Pike and Lady Eugenia Portman to be convicted and sentenced by the court, and for the Portman Lime Works to pass into the hands of trustees. The works still employed labourers, but no relief coal from Dunleigh crossed its gates. Long enough, too, for Ruth Bromley to become Ruth Kingscote, Duchess of Dunleigh. She and Maxwell had married in July at the Brackenhurst chapel before family, tenants' representatives, parish witnesses, and the men who had risked their livelihoods by speaking. The marriage had altered her title. It had not erased her work. Under the settlement signed before the wedding and the estate instrument completed afterward, Ruth remained superintendent of the Dunleigh fuel register, with authority to audit household allotments, question yard entries, and require outside witnesses. Maxwell had insisted the documents state that her office belonged to her competence, not to his indulgence. Ruth had insisted that the same protection apply to whoever succeeded her. Now the first coal distribution of the new winter was about to begin. The restored Weighhouse stood open to the grey morning. The official £56 standard rested in its locked chest until the witnesses called for it. The balance beam had been inspected by the canal company, the parish, and the estate surveyor on a board near the entrance. The month's household totals had been written in a clear hand where any tenant could ask to have them read aloud. Every delivery required a recipient's signature or witnessed mark, the actual cart weight, the yard clerk's signature, and the name of an independent parish witness. No single ledger could close the account alone. Mrs. Webb stood first in line. She wore the same brown shawl Ruth remembered from January, though it had been carefully mended at the hem. Her coal scuttle waited beside her, not empty from refusal, but ready for the small portion she would carry home, while the remainder followed by cart. Number 47, the clerk called. Mrs. Webb presented the new paper allotment slip. No brass token passed from her hand. The old system had ended. The cart rolled onto the platform. The horses were led clear, and the beam moved beneath the measured load. Orme called the weight. The clerk repeated it. Mrs. Webb made her mark beside the entry, while the rector's assistant witnessed it. Ruth checked the figures, then closed the register only after Mrs. Webb had seen the cart slate bearing Willow Row Cottage. "You won't need to ask twice," Ruth said. Mrs. Webb looked at her with eyes that had lost none of their seriousness. "I know, Your Grace." The title still startled Ruth when spoken by someone who had once stood beside her in a coal yard queue. "Ruth will do," Mrs. Webb smiled. "Then you may call me Martha." "Gladly." The cartman touched his cap and guided the load toward Willow Row. No one applauded. The absence of spectacle pleased Ruth. A just system should work without requiring a crowd to admire it. Behind her, Maxwell entered the Weighhouse, carrying a folder from the estate office. He had come from Brackenhurst Hall on horseback, his dark coat marked by a scatter of frost. The workers bowed or removed their caps, but he did not interrupt the distribution. He waited until the next cart had been weighed and the household entry witnessed before approaching Ruth. "The final copy arrived from the court," he said. "Pike's sentence and Lady Eugenia's are entered with the estate papers. The trustees have accepted the revised supply restrictions." Ruth took the folder with her right hand. Her left wrist had healed completely months earlier, though cold weather sometimes reminded her of the rail at Rillford Lock. She opened the papers and read the summary. The law had not moved quickly enough to satisfy Payne, but it had moved openly. Pike's claim that he had acted to preserve employment had not erased the false accounts, the diverted coal, or his attempt to remove evidence. Eugenia's rank had not transformed signed instructions into innocence. "And the Portman workers?" Ruth asked. "The trustees have retained most of them. Contracts will be reviewed quarterly. No relief stock may be purchased under another grade." "Good." Maxwell watched another household mark entered beneath a parish witness. Daniel's record was moved yesterday. At Brackenhurst Hall, the estate service roll no longer described Daniel Bromley as a dismissed clerk responsible for losses. The corrected entry stated that he had identified irregularities in coal weights, had been removed without an independent hearing, and had died before his findings were acknowledged. Ruth had read the words once in private. She had not wept until she reached the final line, which named his work without pretending his daughter's achievement belonged to him. "I thought I would feel his absence less when his name was restored," she said. "I don't." Maxwell's voice softened. "Justice cannot return him." "No, but it can stop his silence from being mistaken for guilt. They walked toward the far side of the Weighhouse, where a glass-fronted frame had been secured beneath the restored beam. The magistrates had retained both number 47 tokens through the trial. After the proceedings ended, the court had released them, through Mr. Vale, to the Dunleigh archive. Their movement had been recorded at every stage. Now Token A and Token B rested on separate labelled mounts beneath an unbroken glass seal. The genuine token remained unpunched, its edge worn by Mrs. Webb's hand. The duplicate bore the wire abrasion from the Portman slate. Neither had been polished. Ruth had refused to let anyone make them prettier than the truth. Maxwell stood beside her. "Do you regret leaving them here?" "Because they remind everyone of what happened. Because they remind you." Ruth looked through the glass. In January, the two pieces of brass had represented a household denied warmth and an estate taught to lie. Now they sat beneath a system that could be challenged by any person whose name appeared within it. "They don't represent shame anymore," she said. "They mark the moment a private system became answerable. Then they remain. They remain." Outside, another cart approached. Its wheels crossed the frozen stones, then settled upon the platform. The official standard was produced from the chest before witnesses. The beam was tested. The loaded cart was weighed. Every number was called aloud. Ruth watched the balance rise and fall, then slow toward level. Maxwell offered his hand. He no longer assumed she would take it merely because they were married. Ruth threaded her fingers through his. His hand closed around hers with the same care he had shown when he bandaged her finger in the estate study. But nothing between them was tentative now. "I love you," he said quietly. There was no inquiry to survive, no proposal to answer, and no audience whose opinion mattered. Ruth turned toward him. "I love you too." She lifted her free hand to his cheek and kissed him. The affection was gentle, familiar, and freely given. Maxwell answered without drawing her away from the work before them. When Ruth stepped back, their fingers remained interlaced. Orme called the final wait. The clerk entered it. Mrs. Cole, serving as the parish witness that morning, signed beneath the figure. The household recipient made a careful mark beside her name. Above the two sealed coal tokens, the restored beam settled perfectly level.